She captivated kings, generals, and men of power. Her dances were hypnotic, her beauty irresistible. But behind the veil of silk and mystery, she held secrets that could topple nations. This is the story of Mata Hari, the woman who fooled the world and whose legend still haunts history. The shadow behind the spotlight. Paris, 1910. The city of lights, the city of secrets. Cafes buzzed with laughter. Artists sketched revolution, and politicians whispered deals in smoke-filled rooms. But in the theaters, on the gilded stages, a different kind of power emerged. A woman glided across the boards, her movements slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic. She was unlike any performer Paris had ever seen. Men could not look away. Women whispered about her daring. And in the eyes of every spectator, there was one thought: who really is she? She was called Mata Hari. But that name was a mask. The truth behind it was buried beneath layers of lies, carefully woven like the silks she wore. Born Margaretha Geertruida MacLeod, she had been nothing, a lonely girl in a small Dutch town, powerless and invisible. Yet she had learned something vital in those early years. People only see what you let them see. And she had mastered that lesson to perfection. By the time she appeared in Paris, she was no longer Margaretha. She was an enigma, a fantasy given flesh. Men who met her claimed to see a princess of the East, a sacred dancer from exotic lands. They did not see the woman who had walked alone through heartbreak, abandonment, and disappointment. They only saw the illusion. And illusions, she knew, are far more dangerous than reality. Because for Mata Hari, the stage was not merely for dancing. It was a battlefield, and every man in the audience was unknowingly a soldier. The making of a legend. Margaretha Zell's life began like many others, quietly, almost unremarkably, in Leeuwarden, the Netherlands, in 1876. Her father was a charismatic man, full of charm and promise, but also deeply flawed. He gave her the warmth of attention, the illusion of security, yet the foundation of her early world would crumble when his fortune vanished, leaving her family fractured. Her mother died when Margaretha was still young, and the world that once seemed safe became unpredictable, cold, and unforgiving. As a teenager, Margaretha longed to escape. Her dreams were bigger than the narrow Dutch streets around her. Then came an opportunity, or, as some would say, a trap. A newspaper advertisement placed by a Dutch colonial army officer, Rudolf MacLeod, promised adventure in the far reaches of the East Indies. He was older, domineering, and distant, yet she saw in him the key to freedom. In 1895, barely 18, she married him and left for an unknown land, crossing oceans, leaving behind everything familiar. The marriage should have been an adventure. It was anything but. Life in the Dutch East Indies became a waking nightmare. MacLeod was cruel and unfaithful. Her children suffered tragedy, and the isolation weighed like a stone. Yet, even in that darkness, Margaretha's mind was alive. She observed the native cultures around her, studied their dances, rituals, and ceremonial movements. She noted the power of attention, of mystery, of ritual. Here, in the shadow of oppression, she was learning the tools she would later wield with deadly precision. By the time she left MacLeod and returned to Europe, she was broken but transformed. No money, no status, no protection, but a secret she had carried across continents. She understood that identity is power, and power is never given, it must be claimed. She began to reinvent herself, shedding Margaretha like a second skin and stepping into a new persona that no one would dare challenge. By the time she appeared on the Parisian stage, the world would no longer remember Margaretha. They would only remember Mata Hari. The birth of Mata Hari. Paris, the city of art, of scandal, of whispered secrets, became her stage. It was here that Margaretha Zell vanished, replaced entirely by Mata Hari, the name that would be feared and admired for decades to come. She was no longer a broken Dutch girl, she was an enigma, a living fantasy, an exotic princess from the East, she claimed, trained in sacred temples, her dances steeped in ritual and mysticism. None of it was true. Every story, every accent, every gesture was meticulously crafted to beguile and to control. And it worked. Theaters filled when she appeared. Men came to Paris from distant cities just to watch her dance. Yet her performances were more than physical displays. They were psychological traps. Every movement was calculated to draw attention, to tease desire, to leave audiences unsettled and longing. She never touched her spectators, yet she could make them feel as though they were the only person in the room. She did not perform, she entranced. Her beauty was intoxicating, but beauty alone could not explain her power. Mata Hari understood the human mind. She knew that desire is a weapon more potent than a sword. Wealthy industrialists, military officers, and diplomats came to her performances. They were eager to be seen with her, eager to share secrets, eager to imagine that they were special in her eyes. They did not see deception, they saw affirmation. They saw fantasy made flesh. And here lies the first great mystery of Mata Hari. Was she seducing them for pleasure or for information? Did she understand the danger she held, or was it all instinct, a dance of survival she never questioned? Perhaps that is the secret that makes her story so compelling. Even those who lived through her manipulations could not tell when the game began or if it ever ended. She did not steal secrets in the conventional sense. Men gave them freely, drawn by her gaze, her words, her presence. Maps, strategies, personal confessions, whispers of alliances, these flowed into her world like water into a net, unnoticed and unresisted. Each man believed he was the master of the situation. Each man believed he had Mata Hari, yet it was she who held the true power. And so, the world's most legendary spy was born, not from training, not from cunning, but from the simple, terrifying power of being believed. The web of deception. World War I had begun, and Europe was plunged into chaos. Soldiers marched, governments crumbled under pressure, and spies moved like shadows in every capital. Mata Hari, with her fame and freedom of travel, became an irresistible enigma to intelligence agencies. France, Germany, and even neutral nations watched her movements with suspicion. Yet the truth was almost impossible to untangle. Did she spy for profit, for survival, or simply for the thrill of the game? Her power lay not in coded messages or hidden documents. She never had to force information from men. They delivered it themselves. Generals, officers, and diplomats, intoxicated by her beauty and charm, revealed plans, troop movements, and confidential insights. In whispered moments during private meetings, in the intimacy of a shared champagne toast, Mata Hari collected fragments of intelligence. She appeared harmless, merely an alluring dancer, but in reality, every revelation was a thread in a growing web. Rumors began to swirl. Whispers of her loyalty or her betrayal filled the halls of Europe's palaces and embassies. Some claimed she was working for Germany, others insisted she served France. Some said she was a double agent, a triple agent, a phantom manipulating all sides simultaneously. No one truly knew. Yet Mata Hari's life was becoming dangerous. Every agent she encountered suspected treachery. Every country she visited wondered if she was a threat. And yet, she continued to glide between borders, performing for kings, generals, and politicians, collecting whispers and smiles, never letting her true intentions show. The paradox of her existence was profound. She was both invisible and irresistible. She could step into a room and dominate the attention of the most powerful men without ever raising her voice. She could charm her way past security, evade suspicion, and leave behind only questions, never answers. And this is where the story twists into tragedy. For in a world where one misstep could mean death, where alliances were fragile and paranoia absolute, the very traits that made her irresistible, her independence, her allure, her secrecy, also made her vulnerable. Someone, somewhere, would decide that Mata Hari had become too dangerous. And when they did, the stage would change once more, from glittering theaters to a cold, silent courtroom. The trial of a legend. In 1917, the world that had once admired Mata Hari turned its gaze upon her with suspicion and fury. She was arrested in Paris, accused of espionage, a traitor to France. The charge was clear. She had supposedly sold secrets to Germany, secrets that could cost thousands of lives. But the truth behind the trial was far murkier. The evidence was circumstantial, the witnesses unreliable, and the entire case rested on fear, rumor, and the convenient narrative of a seductive foreign woman. The courtroom was a theater of judgment. Reporters scribbled furiously, painting Mata Hari as the ultimate femme fatale, a seductress who had enticed men of power into betrayal. Soldiers and politicians whispered that her dances had been more than entertainment, that they had been traps to extract information. The public devoured every story, imagining her not as a human being, but as a shadow moving through the highest echelons of power. And yet, behind the drama, a grim reality persisted. There was no concrete proof she had caused significant harm. The documents that allegedly confirmed her treachery were either misinterpreted or outright fabricated. Some historians argue she may have accepted small sums of money from German contacts, perhaps naively or in self-preservation. But the French authorities needed a scapegoat, a symbol for their failures and fears during a war that was tearing Europe apart. Mata Hari defended herself with dignity and cunning, refusing to appear broken or frightened. She did not beg for mercy, nor did she confess to crimes she may not have committed. Her composure, her elegance, and her refusal to surrender made her all the more infuriating to those determined to see her punished. Every gesture, every glance was a reminder that she was still the woman who controlled the room, even in chains. The trial was a performance, but this time the audience was merciless. Jurors were swayed not by facts, but by the fear of what she represented, a woman whose independence and allure had made powerful men vulnerable. When the verdict came, it was inevitable: guilty. The sentence: death. And in that moment, the world believed the curtain had finally fallen on Mata Hari. Yet even as she faced the firing squad, her story refused to end. Facing the firing squad. January 15th, 1917. The dawn in Vincennes was cold, gray, and unyielding. Mata Hari was led to the execution ground, the weight of her fate pressing against the elegance she had always worn like armor. There was no stage here, no cheering crowds, only soldiers, rifles, and the grim inevitability of death. Yet she did not tremble. She did not plead. In every step, in every movement, she remained the woman who had commanded rooms and hearts across Europe. She refused a blindfold. The legend says she faced the firing squad with a calm, almost mocking gaze, as if daring them to believe that they had any control over her at all. Some witnesses claimed she smiled. Others insisted she held her head high, proud and untouchable. In those final moments, Mata Hari had become more than a woman. She had become an idea that could not be silenced, a story that would outlive bullets, war, and nations.
The rifles fired, 12 shots echoing through the morning air. She fell. And yet, paradoxically, even in death, she controlled the narrative. Stories immediately spread about her courage, her composure, her enigmatic beauty. Even the execution could not strip away the mystique she had spent her life crafting. But the truth, as always, was far murkier. Decades later, historians and declassified documents revealed that her role in espionage may have been vastly exaggerated. Some suggest she never transmitted information that significantly altered the course of the war. She was, perhaps, a convenient scapegoat, an exotic foreigner who could be blamed while generals and governments escaped scrutiny. And yet, that ambiguity is precisely what makes her legend endure. Was she a spy, a manipulator, or merely a woman navigating a world that sought to punish her independence and charm? Even today, the question remains unanswered. Mata Hari's death may have been final, but her story, her power, and her mystery continued to captivate the world, defying truth itself.
The legacy of Mata Hari. Death did not end Mata Hari's story, it only amplified it. In the years that followed, newspapers, books, and films transformed her into the ultimate femme fatale, the archetype of the dangerous, seductive woman who could topple nations with a glance. Her name became shorthand for intrigue, espionage, and betrayal, a character larger than life, untethered from the reality of her existence. Documents released decades later show that Mata Hari likely did very little real damage. She may have handed over fragments of information, but nothing that decisively shifted the course of the war. Yet her legend eclipsed those facts. Why? Because the world needed a story. France, humiliated and desperate during the chaos of World War I, found in her a symbol to pin its fears, its failures, and its fantasies. A foreign woman who could seduce powerful men became the scapegoat, the warning, and the myth. Mata Hari herself, even in life, understood this truth instinctively. She had mastered the art of performance, perception, and belief. She knew that reality mattered less than the story people told themselves about her. Whether she had truly betrayed anyone became irrelevant. The image, the persona, and the aura were what endured. Men and nations alike projected onto her their desires, their anxieties, and their fantasies. She became a mirror, reflecting everything people feared and longed for all at once. Even today, her story persists in classrooms, documentaries, novels, and films. She is remembered as a spy, a seductress, a traitor, and an icon of female power. But she was also, perhaps above all, a lesson in the dangerous potency of perception. Mata Hari proved that identity could be crafted, that charm could wield influence, and that a single person, armed with intelligence and allure, could manipulate the world in ways far more profound than violence or force ever could. Her death was final, her truth remains elusive, and her legend continues to captivate because Mata Hari did not just perform on stage, she performed for history itself. In the end, the greatest power she held was not in espionage, wealth, or fame. It was in her ability to make the world believe against all reason in her story. A story of mystery, of seduction, of illusion, and one that no one has been able to fully unravel even a century later. The unanswered mysteries. Even a century later, Mata Hari's story is shrouded in shadows. Scholars and historians continue to debate what really happened behind closed doors, what was fact and what was manufactured by fear, politics, and scandal. Some claim she was a brilliant double agent operating with precision and cunning. Others insist she was a naive courtesan caught in a war she could not control. And yet, in every version, one element remains constant. No one can separate the woman from the myth. One of the most perplexing mysteries involves the very letters and messages that condemned her. Codes, interpretations, and confessions were presented at her trial as undeniable proof of treason. But later analysis suggests that many of these documents were either fabricated, misread, or taken out of context. Some argue that the French authorities, desperate to assign blame during the chaos of war, seized upon her as the perfect scapegoat. After all, what better villain than a foreign woman whose allure and independence unsettled powerful men? There are even stories that Mata Hari may have attempted to manipulate multiple sides simultaneously, not out of loyalty, but survival. She traveled freely across Europe, entering countries at a time when borders were crawling with spies, soldiers, and paranoia. Some historians speculate she gathered only the fragments of information she could, intending to play them for financial gain, not military advantage. Yet this theory is impossible to prove, leaving room for endless speculation. Her personal life is another enigma. Accounts of her relationships with men vary wildly. Some claim she fell in love, others insist she never cared for anyone but herself. Was she truly a cold manipulator, or simply a woman navigating a world designed to exploit her? Did she consciously play the role of the seductress, or did she act instinctively, letting her charm and survival instincts dictate her choices? These questions have no definitive answers. Perhaps the most haunting mystery is why the world continues to tell her story in exaggerated form. She was executed as a traitor, yet she is remembered as a legend. Nations believed she could topple governance, but evidence suggests her real influence may have been minimal. Still, the image persists. The exotic dancer who seduced generals, the woman whose gaze could unravel men and nations, the master of illusion who made the world believe in her power. And therein lies the lesson. Mata Hari's true power was never in espionage. It was in her ability to control perception, to blur the line between truth and fiction, and to ensure that history would remember her not as she was, but as everyone wanted her to see.